Hello and welcome to another episode of Story Bakes with Katie Sue. Today I'm bending the rules a little bit. This is my 10th video, which may not sound like much of a milestone, but for me, it's an accomplishment. I make these videos while also working full-time and working on other creative pursuits, like writing. Instead of taking inspiration from a story, this bake is inspired by my absolute favorite writing podcast, Turning to Story, hosted by Lissa Mia Smith and Anna Mercier. Let's head to the Podcasts app for inspiration. If you scroll all the way down, you'll find the second episode titled 7-Layer Plot Dip. I've always wanted to make an opera cake, and while we're going pretty far off the rails here, this is opera adjacent. Is that like the modern musical? I don't know, just move your head back and forth. Anyhoodle, we'll get more into the 7-point story structure, lovingly referred to as 7-layer plot dip on the podcast, later. What's important now is that we're making an opera-style cake with 7 layers inspired by 7-layer dip. One of those layers will be an homage to Basil Salsa, by which I mean that we're making a layer of basil and strawberry salsa set in lime gelatin. Basil-strawberry, right? I feel like the link between Basil-Strawberry and But So is about as strong as the reasoning behind naming the episode But So Salsa, which is to say, very. I'm so on theme here in like a meta way. We should also discuss what constitutes a layer. This won't be 7 different layers because the sponge will be in there twice, and the top decorative part all counts as 1. We'll also have a layer of sweet red bean paste, whipped cream stabilized with cream cheese, our But So salsa, of course, and avocado cream. I've got a lot of components to make, so let's get to the baking. For the refried beans layer of 7-layer dip, I'm using these adzuki beans that I got from Wee, an Asian grocery delivery service that I've mentioned before. Again, not sponsored, but I'll put a link in the description below to check them out. I'm measuring out 200 grams of the beans, then picking through them to remove any discolored, broken, wrinkly, or otherwise unacceptable beans. Like this one. What's in there? Cover the beans with water, then bring them to a boil, put on the lid, and boil them for 10 minutes. Then drain the beans, return them to the pot, cover with more water, and boil with the lid on for at least an hour or until the beans mash easily. I thought this was fine at around 1 hour, but in retrospect, I would cook them a little bit longer. Then I'm adding 100 grams of white sugar, 75 grams of brown sugar, and a couple pinches of salt. Turn the heat back on and cook, stirring constantly for about 5 to 10 minutes or until you've reached the consistency that you like, keeping in mind that it will thicken as it cools. I want mine to be very thick so that it will be a sturdy second layer for the cake. I lined a 9x9-inch pan with some cling film, then I'm putting in the bean paste and using an offset spatula to smooth it out into as even a layer as possible. Sweet red bean paste is a common ingredient in many traditional Asian sweets like buns or as a soup, but it's not something we see a lot here in the US. Honestly, it's not my favorite, but like I mentioned earlier, I think I would have liked the texture more if I'd cooked the beans longer. I'm going to let the bean layer cool to room temperature before covering and refrigerating. For our salsa layer, I'm going to first dice a pound of strawberries, minus a few because they looked delicious. This layer has strawberries in place of tomatoes and basil instead of cilantro. Then it's all held together by some lime gelatin, much like how But So salsa can help hold your story together. The creators of South Park have explained their method for plotting so that each scene affects the next. They call it But Therefore, and in Turning to Storyland, it's called But So, to be a little less formal and a lot more silly. An example would be that Monkey Atsu wants Aang to have a normal childhood, but he's the Avatar. So the monks want to send him away. So Aang gets upset and runs away, but he's caught in a storm, and so on and so forth. Each plot point leads to the next. I need to do more Avatar bakes. No, not you. After the strawberries are all diced, I'm going to chop about a couple of tablespoons of basil, then add that and the zest of 1 lime to the strawberries and stir to combine. I've prepared the 9x9-inch pan with some plastic wrap, and I'm adding the strawberry mixture to it and leveling it out with an offset spatula. Now here I got to thinking that I needed to make some space so that there was actually room for the gelatin to hold everything together, so I took out some and set it aside for snacks. I could have taken out even more, but this still worked. For the gelatin, I'm soaking 3 sheets in ice water for 10 minutes. While that soaks, I'm taking 60 grams of sugar and adding 1.5 cups of boiling water to it, then stirring to dissolve the sugar. Then I'm adding the lime juice and stirring it in, then squeezing the water out of the gelatin sheets and stirring it until it melts. Pour the lime gelatin over the strawberries. It's okay if the strawberries move around, we're going to level it out. I'm not using all of the gelatin, just enough to cover the strawberries because I want a fairly thin layer. I'm evening things out here, then this is going into the fridge to set. You want to give it at least a few hours. I'm doing this the day before assembly. We're pausing here for a little snack. Did anyone else's mom give them hot jello when they were sick? It was hot out when I made this, but there's still something nice about the warm gelatin mixture. Hi, Mom. Okay, now for some feathers. If you saw the last episode inspired by the cover of Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo, you might remember that I said I won't be trying to work with chocolate again until it cools down. It had not cooled down, and I'm still a little traumatized by the whole experience, so I'm using some candy melts here. They're much more forgiving, even if they're not quite as tasty. I'm melting some of these down, then I'm adding an oil-based pink food coloring. It's important to make sure you have the right kind of food coloring for the project you're working on. For chocolate, candy melts, and other things that are composed entirely or mostly of fats and don't have any water, you should use an oil-based or fat dispersible food coloring. I have this liquid one and I have some powders I'm going to use later. When you've reached the color you want, it's time to make the feathers. This is the same process as for the Six of Crows tart. I'm going to transfer the melts to a small cup so I can dip my paring knife into it more easily, then I'm setting down some acetate. Dip the paring knife in, lay it down on the acetate, then lift it up slightly and pull back. Some of the feathers have more of a quill end than the others. This is still a skill that I'm working on. This time, I'm using an empty paper towel roll to give the feathers a nice curve while they chill. After they're set, I'm melting just a little bit more of the candy melts, then using some blue and yellow powder fat dispersible food coloring to make it green. Then, using a small brush, I'm painting the quill and shaft of the feathers green. For the Joconde, which is an almond-based sponge, I'm whisking together 3 eggs, 80 grams of powdered sugar, and 115 grams of almond flour. After this is heated to around 90 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit over a double boiler, I'm beating it until it's nice and pale and fluffy. Then with clean beaters, I'm whipping 4 egg whites until they're frothy, then adding 40 grams of sugar a third at a time, whipping in between additions. Stop when you get stiff, glossy peaks. Then gently fold a third of the egg whites into the egg yolk mixture, followed by 30 grams of all-purpose flour. Fold the egg whites in 2 more additions until no streaks remain. I'm taking a little of the batter and stirring it into 2 tablespoons of melted butter and making a mess. Then folding this back into the main batter. You want to be gentle with the batter since there's no baking powder or soda, and all the rise is going to come from the air trapped in the eggs. I have half a sheet pan that I've buttered, put a piece of parchment on, and then buttered the parchment. I'm using a bowl scraper to get the batter into as even a layer as I can. Then this bakes at 425 degrees Fahrenheit for about 10 minutes. After it cools, run a knife or spatula around the edges and loosen any stubborn spots. Then turn it out. I'm measuring a 9 by 9 inch square, pausing for some snacks, then cutting the remaining cake to make the equivalent of a 9 by 9 inch square. Stack them with a piece of parchment in between, have a little more snack, then wrap and refrigerate until we're ready to assemble. I'm combining 1 cup of apple juice with 25 grams of sugar and then simmering this until it reduces down to a nice syrupy consistency. We're not going to need very much of this, just a little bit for the decoration. Here in the US, we mostly use avocados for guacamole or put it on toast. And heck, I'm a millennial. I love both of those things. But in other parts of the world, it's not uncommon to use avocados for desserts. So instead of guacamole for our 7-layer cake, we're making a sweet avocado cream. 2 avocados go into the food processor along with the zest and juice of 1 lime. Blend this up, scraping down the sides throughout this whole process as needed. Then I'm blending in 170 grams of cream cheese, then 100 grams of powdered sugar. Last, in goes 1 sheet of gelatin that I soaked, then melted in the microwave. Could you add all of these things at the same time and blend them together? Probably. 57 grams of cold cream cheese gets whipped up to help loosen it. A couple of tablespoons of powdered sugar and a splash of vanilla also get mixed in. Then I'm adding 1.5 cups of heavy cream a little at a time. I apologize for switching between US and metric. I'm a monster. The cream cheese will help stabilize the whipped cream and also give it a slight sour note, like the sour cream layer of 7-layer dip. 7-layer plot dip is the podcast's name for 7-point story structure as presented by author Dan Wells. There's a link to his talk in the corner and in the description below, and it's basically a way to think about and plan the major story beats in your book. I have 9 different plot dips that have helped a ton with the outlining and planning for the book I'm currently drafting, and they track things like the external plot, the internal arc for my main characters, and the romance arcs. Both the Turning to Story episode and the original videos are worth checking out. Now, once stiff peaks have formed, place this in the fridge until we're ready to assemble. For the blue ganache layer, I'm stirring together 180 grams of white chocolate, 60 grams of hot cream, and some blue food coloring. Keep on adding food coloring to get the color that you want. I also added a little bit of violet. After straining, I'm setting this aside while I assemble the layers. Alright, let's put it all together. First, I have one of the Joconde layers. I'm using the one that's in 2 pieces here because I want the one in 1 piece to be beneath the salsa. You'll see what I mean. I'm going to brush the sponge with some simple syrup. This is equal parts by volume of sugar and water, heated until the sugar dissolves, and then cooled to room temperature. Then flop the sweet red bean paste onto it, and, that's okay. I'll kind of smush it back together, and it's good as new. Next comes the whipped cream, and you can plop some down on there and spread it into an even layer, but I'm going to pipe it on in a totally random pattern that has no backwards letters. I'm spreading the whipped cream out all the way to the edges, and I'm trying to keep the layers fairly even here. I'm brushing the second Joconde sponge layer with simple syrup, then getting the Basil-Strawberry Salsa gelatin. Now this isn't as firm as I hoped it would be, and we all saw what happened with the red bean paste, so we're getting a little creative with assembly here. I'm placing the sponge syrup side down on top of the gelatin, inverting a baking sheet over it, then flipping the whole thing over so the cake is on the bottom. This goes on top of the whipped cream, and I didn't have to worry about the Joconde being in 2 pieces here when I transferred it. I was thinking ahead, like doing pre-drafting work before diving into writing a book. Next is a layer of the avocado cream, again spread evenly into the edges, then this goes in the fridge for about an hour. Longer would be better to allow the avocado cream to set, but I was in a race against the day getting very hot, so an hour is what I gave it. Then I pour on and spread out the ganache. At this point, I was still undecided on whether or not to make this into 4 larger pieces or 9 smaller ones. I decided on 9 because it'd be easier to share amongst friends, but 7-layer dip-inspired cake is kind of a hard sell, so I needn't have worried. You can see here that the top layer and the avocado cream are a little droopy, and a longer chill time would have helped this a lot. First, I'm laying out a border of yellow sprinkles. I'm leaving some areas blank because they'll be covered up with some whipped cream. I have leveled up so much in the way I approach writing and think about story by listening to the podcast and all of the smart things Anna and Lissa say. Don't get me wrong, they are silliness personified, but they also discuss different philosophies and approaches and methods of writing in a way that is digestible and entertaining, much like how I strive for the bakes on the channel to be. Next, I'm piping the whipped cream on with a Wilton 2A tip in these cloud shapes. Each cloud puff then gets 2 green star sprinkles. A pink feather goes in the middle, and I still have that syrup made out of apple juice? Now, a little bit of this can go anywhere. Say, I don't know, in the corner here. And I'm going to sprinkle on some sparkly sugar, just for fun. Unrelated, I made a vegan Edward ice cream cake a couple of months ago. Link to that is in the corner. And here we are, a Turning to Story 7-layer plot dip cake. The layers turned out pretty neat, and overall, I'm pretty happy with it. I think the only change I'd make design-wise would be to pipe a yellow border rather than use sprinkles, and someday I'll get good at chocolate and be able to use that instead of candy melts. I'm very curious about how this is going to taste, so here we go. When you take a bite all together, the Basil-Strawberry Salsa stands out the most. It's a really fresh, bright pop of flavor. The avocado cream has such a velvety, creamy texture and is a mixture of sweet and lime with that distinctive avocado flavor coming in after. It's really interesting and really different for me. Whipped cream is delicious, there were no doubts there, and I really like the Joconde Sponge. My only real qualm is the red bean paste, and I really should have boiled the beans for a little while longer, so that's on me. The new season of Turning to Story is coming out soon, or maybe it's already started. Who knows? I can be really slow to edit. I highly recommend giving them a listen if you're at any stage of writing stories. They make tons of different writing methods and philosophies so accessible, and they add their own personal insights to each one. And I find myself returning to the podcast whenever I'm stuck. Hit the like button if you want to see more story-themed bakes, subscribe if you're so inclined, and let me know in the comments what characters, shows, or movies I should turn into bakes next. Thanks for watching! Since I had lots of 7-layer plot dip cake left over to snack on, I'm making some avocado toast with a spare avocado and lime. I just mash up some avocado, which I find way more practical and easier to eat than slices. Spread that on some toast, I like sourdough, then it gets a bit of lime juice and some granulated garlic, red chili flakes, and salt. Oh yeah, I'd take this over owning my own home any day.